I'm 60, a widow, and last month my own son called me an extra mouth. They shoved me out with 2 suitcases. That night, a sealed letter fell from my mother's recipe book, 1 name, 1 fortune, 1 instruction. I moved in silence. At the tenant meeting, I stood up and said, "Good evening, I'm Elaine, your landlord." Petra hissed, "This is a circus." I smiled. No, it's a lease. Now guess who's threatening to go public, and who's about to learn what I hid in plain sight. I carried the scent of lilies from the funeral home into Rivercrest Flats, and it clung to me the way winter clings to glass. The elevator sighed before choosing a floor, the doors shivering open as if the building itself were undecided about letting me in. "Petra, she's here," my son called, and I tightened on the scuffed suitcase with my husband's old tag still attached. I told myself this would be temporary, a pause, not a verdict. I told myself I was still a mother, even without a lamp of my own to set down. The apartment wore lemon cleaner and ambition. Petra's glossy brochures glittered across the coffee table like expensive scales, while my thrift store coat shed tired pills onto the arm of the sofa. Noah kissed my cheek, then drifted back toward the match he'd paused present, but already retreating. "We made space," Petra said, guiding me to a curtained dining nook whose rod drooped like a weary eyelid. The word space sounded like an apology dressed as generosity. My suitcase became a dresser when I stacked shirts on a chair where birthdays had once been sung. I lined my blouses with the neatness of a nurse counting pills, morning, afternoon, night, pretending order could medicate grief. Petra lifted my mother's recipe book with 2 fingers, as if it were a damp rag. "Grease-stained," she laughed. I placed it on the counter anyway, a small altar I could touch when my hands began to tremble. By the door, a crooked hook held a spare key tied with a red ribbon, EM written in my careful letters. The small cuts began almost politely. I settled with chamomile and a comforting period drama, just as my chest unclenched. Petra ghosted through, lifted the remote, and replaced tenderness with a tour of granite islands and statement lighting. "Background noise helps me focus," she said. Noah did not look up. In the fridge, my labeled soup migrated behind 6 cans of sparkling water that posed like soldiers. "Plastic makes the place look tired," Petra said lightly. "We're staging life." I nodded until my throat burned. In the bathroom, a laminated chart appeared, taped at eye level. Shower minutes, 8. Bulbs, LED only. Laundry, cold cycles on weekend afternoons. "Every extra minute of shower time costs," Petra said, clicking her pen like a metronome that could measure worth. Noah kissed the top of my head as he passed a gesture so brief it felt like a refund. "Let me cook," I offered, because a pot is a place to set your hands when there's nowhere else to put them. "Let me cook. It keeps my hands from shaking." Petra smiled. "Maybe Tuesday if the smell isn't heavy." Downstairs, the notice board leaned under tape ghosts and curling corners. Between babysitter numbers and lost cat Xeroxes, a municipal flyer shouted from its starch, "City Tax Arrears Auction." The crest looked like a stern eyebrow. The words meant nothing to me beyond trouble, yet my eyes snagged on delinquent property the way a sleeve catches on a nail. I slid the red ribbon key from its hook to buy milk, then slid it back after, performing a private ritual of belonging so quiet that, I hoped, it would not be noticed and taken away. Night made the curtain breathe against my cheek. The apartment spoke in murmurs, Petra's heels making judgments down the hall, Noah's game volleys like distant fireworks, the refrigerator humming with dignified purpose. I texted my son when loneliness pressed against my ribs like an iron. "I'm okay." 3 dots bloomed and died. In the morning, Petra lifted the curtain as if peeking into a cage. "We're doing a showing on Saturday virtual, but Airy helps." I folded my blanket into a precise accordion. "Of course." The word tasted like licking a stamp. On Thursday, the remote lay centered on the table as part of the decor. "Do you mind if I finish my episode?" I asked. "They finally find the actress's child," Petra beamed. "You love your stories," she said, raising the volume on a foyer so bright it looked imaginary. "This staging is aspirational," Noah murmured. "We'll catch up later, Mom." I made tea I didn't want. When I opened the fridge, the soup was gone. "Oh," Petra said without turning. I decluttered. Smells linger. Something inside me folded like wax paper and refused to spring open. I brought my sorrow to the stove. Garlic, onion, a carrot shaved into coins, the thin economy of flavor learned from years of turning not enough into supper. Dinner? I ventured. Petra glanced at a spreadsheet whose candy-colored columns made money look like a game. We've got meal prep, she said. Macros, Noah added. Save yours, Mom. I turned off the burner and pressed my palm flat to the cooling metal until the hiss went quiet. I won't make a scene, I whispered to the cupboard hinges. I did enough crying at the graveside. The cupboard, like most witnesses, had nothing to say. Winter pressed its cold mouth to the windows. I wore my husband's sweater and touched the cracked spine of the recipe book, the way you touch a photograph carefully, as if it might bruise. My mother had measured flour by palm, not cup. She believed you learned texture by listening with your hands. I imagined her voice. Cut the butter until it looks like peas. Keep going until it holds together. Outside, the snow began as gossip and became truth. In the reflection, my face wore the expression I'd had when the last nurse said there was nothing more to do. The eviction arrived wearing a cardigan and eyeliner. Petra set 2 plates, then slid a third back into the cupboard with a whispering scrape. She laid a color-coded household budget where a placemat might go, the top row labeled utilities, the bottom row labeled reality. We're recentering, she said, soft as satin. We can't support an extra mouth. You said this was temporary. Her voice tried for kind and landed on efficient. My mouth opened and closed like a fish that thought it understood the bowl. I can find shifts, I said. The hospital cafe. The sentence drifted like steam into cold. Noah rubbed his eyes, tired from lifting boxes, tired from being a bridge and a fence. Mom, maybe it's best for a while. For a while is a hallway phrase long, drafty, and lined with doors that never open for you. I looked at the curtain, pretending to be a wall, at the red ribbon key hanging like a small holiday in a home that did not celebrate me. All right, I said, tasting metal. Tell me what you need. Petra exhaled, as if she'd been bracing for thunder and gotten only a warning cloud. We can help you book somewhere, she offered, businesslike. I packed 2 bags, the black with the stubborn wheel, the blue with a zipper that stuck then relented with a sigh. I folded socks like little lungs, slid the recipe book between sweaters where it wouldn't be judged for being old. Noah stood in the doorway, a silhouette cut out of a brighter room. You'll text me? He asked. Of course, I said, meaning yes and no. Petra reached past me and lifted the red ribbon key from its crooked hook, brisk as weather. She set it in a shallow dish, like returning a prop after the rehearsal for a play I wasn't in. By the coat rack, a stack of mail leaned like unasked questions. A taped notice peeked from the bottom, stamped with the city crest and the phrase, Municipal Lions, in a typeface that didn't need exclamation points to shout. Petra had wedged it beneath a coupon for 2 large pizzas, as if an official warning were an advertisement. I wasn't sure what liens meant beyond trouble, but the word stuck to my tongue like a seed. I wound my scarf twice and memorized the hallway, collecting details the way a witness stores facts in case she is later asked to prove she existed. At the door, I checked if I'd left anything behind. A hair on the sink, a foolish optimism, a version of myself who believed kindness would be rewarded. Petra touched my sleeve the way you pat a dog before closing the gate. We're not a charity, she whispered to Noah, barely. Sure I wouldn't hear. I heard. My husband's sweater felt like armor with a dent. I lifted my bags, and the weight ran down my bones into the floor. Outside, snow swirled like confetti at a party I wasn't invited to. The elevator hesitated, then admitted me. On the curb, the wind bit the soft underside of my throat. I set the suitcases down and braced both palms on their tops, as if a sudden gust might roll my life into traffic. Headlights combed the street. The corner cafe blinked open with neon bravado and glass fragility. I used to tuck him in from this cold, I said. The words left little footprints that filled with frost. A bus sighed to a stop, but I did not climb aboard. I listened to the building breathe, pipes coughing, a dog shaking off its loneliness leash, someone laughing in a kitchen where soup was not a sin. I waited until my fingers stopped burning enough to dial a motel. The clerk's cheerful voice made vacancy sound like mercy. I told myself the curtained nook had been a bridge, not a sentence. Bridges lead somewhere if you keep walking. Across the street, the lobby notice board hummed under fluorescent light, and the city tax arrears auction flyer caught the glare, gleaming like a coin at the bottom of a fountain nobody believed in anymore. I thought, that looks expensive, and shivered. Snow thickened, turning the alley into a tunnel. My phone buzzed with silence. The cab arrived. The driver hefted one suitcase with a grunt that carried judgment and kindness in equal measure. "You okay, ma'am?" he asked, eyes soft in the rear view. "I'm learning to be," I said, and watched Rivercrest shrink, each window a square of someone else's warmth. As we turned, I glanced back. Through the lobby glass, the crooked hook hung empty, a thread snipped clean from a hem. Above the mailboxes, another official page had been taped, "Crooked patient as winter, municipal lions." Petra walked by without looking, as if some problems vanish if you never speak their names. The room I rented above the bodega had walls the color of tea left too long to steep, and a radiator that knocked like a bad heartbeat behind the plaster. The window looked over the alley where crates of oranges glowed in their mesh sacks even after closing, and the sodium streetlight hummed as if it were practicing grief. I set my 2 bags down and sat on the bed that crackled with plastic, the mattress protector loud enough to embarrass pain. The clerk downstairs had called me dear and slid a ring with 2 keys across the counter like a consolation prize. I told him I wouldn't be here long. I said it the way a person says, "This won't scar," and hopes the skin agrees. I texted Noah twice, careful with the words like a nurse measuring medicine. I found a place. I'm safe. The bubbles came those tiny gray promises of a reply, and then disappeared. One message grew a small blue confirmation. Seen. It was a modern kind of silence, polite and complete. I placed the phone face down on the nightstand and listened to the radiator knock out the time like a janitor's keys against a pipe. I didn't cry. I counted instead. Breaths, ceiling tiles, seconds between knocks, the number of times I had said, "Of course," to keep the peace. Sleep arrived the way a shy cat arrives only when I stopped reaching for it. I woke to the smell of coffee that wasn't mine, and the bodega doorbell chiming to announce bagels, cigarettes, hope. The room had a narrow desk, a chair that wobbled, and a lamp with an earnest pull chain. I unpacked like a woman building a raft, sweater here, socks there, a toothbrush in a chipped mug. When I lifted my mother's recipe book from the suitcase, the spine split with a soft sigh, and something slid out and skated across the vinyl floor like a pale fish. A sealed envelope lay at my feet, dignified and yellowed, the paper whiter where the flap had been pressed for decades against the glue. The handwriting on the front was tidy and old-fashioned, loops with purpose. For Elaine. My name looked new in that script, like it had been blessed by a teacher I never met. I sat on the bed and slit the envelope with my thumbnail, the paper giving way with a sound like a breath being let go. Inside was a single sheet, crisp enough to argue with air, and blue ink that had not faded into apology. "Elaine, I failed you in daylight but not in provision. A. W." The first line struck like a small bell. I read it again, slower, because some sentences carry more gravity than their words. The letter went on to name Alastair Ward, a shipping magnate whose name had sailed through headlines when I was a girl. It named Miriam Klein, a trust's lawyer. It named me in a way no one had, not even my mother, who made love into food and silence into shelter. It cited an off-estate account arranged to avoid scandal and guaranteed by a conscience too cowardly for light. I held the page above my knees and felt time reorganize its furniture. The radiator knocked. Somewhere below, a child laughed, and a bottle cap rolled. "You took care of me in secret," I said into the room, not to accuse, but to mark the moment a map unfolded. My mother had hidden this, tucked it between bread pudding and chicken fricassee, as if the knowledge itself were a spice to be added only when the stew was ready. I pressed the edge of the letter to my lower lip until it cooled. Then I laid it flat and read every word twice. I found hotel stationery in the drawer, the kind with a logo that tries to make budget look dignified, and wrote to Miss Miriam Klein with a slowness that felt like reverence. I told her my name and my mother's, mentioned the recipe book, described the handwriting, gave the initials as if delivering a fragile heirloom I could not afford to drop. I walked the envelope down to the blue mailbox 3 blocks away. A winter hat pulled low, my husband's sweater under my coat like a pledge. The mailbox swallowed it with a clank that sounded final, and then not final at all. Her reply arrived faster than hope usually travels. There was a voicemail from a voice that had sanded its edges but kept its warmth. "Elaine," she said, the syllables careful, "I remember your mother's hands." She gave an address in a professional building shaped like a modest promise and added, "Come tomorrow, bring the book. And your courage." I listened to the message 3 times, then wrote the address on a sticky note and pressed it to the mirror, where it held next to a flake of old tape and my reflection learning a new shape. When I arrived, the building smelled like printer paper and patience. Miriam Klein opened her office door the way librarians open old volumes, with tenderness and a quiet expectation that you will behave. She was 71 if she was a day, her hair a cloud held back by a black ribbon, her suit the slate of good stone. Her handshake was a measured thing. "You look like her," she said, not as flattery but as a confirmation. I placed the recipe book on the desk like a reliquary and slid the letter across the grain. "She spoke of flour as if it were forgiveness," Miriam said, touching the cracked leather with fingers that had likely signed 1,000 discreet papers. She asked for very little, and even that cost her. She turned to a steel filing cabinet that regarded the room with square-shouldered loyalty and drew out a thin file whose tab read an alias I recognized from the letter. Inside were copies of legal agreements, a notarized instruction, a list of account numbers, balances, transfers. She laid them down as if placing bandages in a specific order. "Some men hide their love in safes," she murmured. "That doesn't make it worthless." I breathed through my mouth because the room had turned thin. "If love can't be public," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "let the justice be." Miriam's eyes pinned mine, not unkindly, evaluating the architecture of my resolve. "You've been discounted," she said, "by a culture and by a certain kind of woman who thinks she can price dignity like a condo." Petra's name was never spoken, but it hovered, expensive and small. I nodded. "If I'm a burden," I said softly, "let me at least be a burden with a ledger." Miriam began the verification ritual that makes truth breathe. She copied my identification. She cross-checked signatures against the letter and an old photograph of my mother, holding me as an infant, tucked at the back of the file like a private sunrise. She dialed a private banker whose tone adjusted when he heard her name. "We will not discuss identity on an unsecured line," she said. "We will discuss instructions." She asked me questions you only ask when you plan to hand someone a steering wheel. "Do you understand anonymity clauses? Do you understand that discretion is not shame but shield?" The portfolio was modest by wealthy standards, life-altering by mine. Conservative equities, municipal bonds, some dividends reinvested, and a savings account that had grown like moss quietly, steadily, insisting on its right to be green. There was also a clause that protected the benefactor's anonymity, but did not restrain mine. "He is dead," Miriam said, not unkindly. "Which sometimes makes men braver." She slid a summary sheet toward me. The numbers didn't shout. They breathed. The room recalibrated around them. I did not think of handbags or vacations. I thought of walls and locks and the price of not being told to take shorter showers. We ate crackers from a tin and drank tea that tasted like ethical clarity as Miriam explained the anonymity language. "You can accept," she said, "and you can choose what to do with the power acceptance brings." I felt a small, bright thing in my chest begin to warm, the way a pilot light whispers before a stove becomes useful. "What would you do?" I asked. Miriam smiled without showing teeth. "I don't live your story," she said. "I only file it. But I've learned this much. Survival begins the day you stop asking permission to exist." The radiator in my room was quieter that night, as if it had decided to run on my breath instead of steam. I spread the summary sheet on the desk and traced the columns with a blunt pencil. I Googled words like fiduciary and limited liability and learned that a company could be a coat you wear to keep the rain from soaking through your blouse. I clicked through city websites, their fonts trying to make bureaucracy feel friendly, and read about property liens and tax arrears sales. A sentence on one page matched the flyer I had seen by the mailboxes, and I sat up straighter, feeling the tug of a loose thread. The visible foe was still Petra, her contempt trimmed like a hedge, and the invisible foe was the system that had decided women like me were rusted, inconvenient, loud only when we were useful. But I now had an ally whose tools were paper, clauses, and time. I returned to Miriam's office with questions in a notebook and a spine that was learning the choreography of standing. We spoke about shields that look like signatures, about how privacy trusts can be lined with honest intent, about why you fix things without announcing who holds the wrench. Miriam opened a form and typed Wardmere Holdings, incorporated into the field marked Entity Name, her hands steady and ordinary, like a nurse changing a dressing. "You don't need to be seen to be effective," she said, "but you may choose to be seen later, on your terms." She filed registrations and walked me through a mail drop where my future could receive letters without inviting wolves to the door. When she finished, she looked at me, as if measuring whether I could carry the weight I'd just agreed to lift. "You are not the extra mouth," she said. "You are the roof." I left with a folder and a posture. Outside, the city blew its breath down the narrow streets, and the bodega doorbell chimed the way small bells do before weather changes. I stopped at a cafe that steamed its windows with kindness and bought a coffee I could suddenly afford without performing gratitude. I wasn't giddy. I was aligned. The numbers in the file didn't make me someone else. They made me more fully myself, the woman who had kept a hospital cafeteria running through flu seasons and shortages, who knew that feeding people is logistics and love. In the evening, I called Noah and reached voicemail. I said, "I'm okay," which was true in a way that frightened me with its unfamiliarity. I said, "I love you," which was true in a way that was older than any account. I did not mention the letter, the account, the company. Some truths are seedlings that need the greenhouse of quiet. I placed the phone beside the recipe book and drew a slow line under a sentence in my notebook. "If love can't be public, let the justice be." When I spread the documents one more time across the desk, a simple calculation nudged me. The account had grown quietly, dividends tucked and compounding, a patient accrual that looked like moss and acted like a river. There was enough to form a company and act, enough to lace purpose into the hem of my days, enough to choose without begging. The radiator thumped twice, affirmation, punctuation. I turned off the lamp, and in the dark I could see the outline of the future, the way sailors see coastline, not yet touchable, but near. I slept without dreaming of keys. In the morning I made a list with verbs that didn't tremble: review, register, learn, bid. I underlined learn twice because knowledge felt like heat. When I left for the lawyer's office, the oranges downstairs were being stacked into pyramids. "Cold day, dear," the clerk said. "Warmer than yesterday," I answered, and surprised us both with the truth tucked inside the ordinary reply. I tightened my scarf and stepped into air that no longer tasted like leftover belonging. I had a ledger. I had a name for it. I had a plan. I treated City Hall like night school. After dinner from a paper box and tea from a chipped mug, I opened my laptop and let a stern woman in a gray blazer teach me about liens. She spoke in acronyms and clauses, and I wrote every one down in a spiral notebook that still smelled faintly of pencil shavings. I paused the webinar when she said arrears and underlined it twice. Arrears looked like a word that had lost too many trains and learned to wait at platforms without complaining. I copied the statute numbers, wrote them phonetically in the margins so I wouldn't stumble aloud if someone asked me to read. The next video explained tax arrears auctions, and I noticed how calmly they described the moment a building becomes a bargain for strangers. The slides showed calendars with red circles and bidding windows that snapped shut like suitcases. I rewound and wrote definitions: encumbrance, levy, redemption period. My notebook became a glossary. Each term felt like a tool I could hold without being accused of stealing it. "If I can't be welcome," I whispered to the radiator, "I can be lawful." The radiator answered with a warm knock. I learned landlord codes the way I had once learned recipes, by doing and then doing again. I watched a video on habitability and wrote a grocery list version: heat that works, stairs that don't betray knees, halls that light on command. I read about quiet enjoyment, which sounded like the right to breathe without apology. I watched an inspection officer cite a peeling handrail. He wasn't angry. He was a metronome of standards. I liked that. Standards are a kind of love for people you will never meet. By the third night, I had mapped a plan. Wardmere Holdings, Incorporated. The name looked like a coat that kept rain from getting inside me. With Miriam's guidance, I registered the entity through a privacy trust. She showed me how signatures can be shields, and how mail can arrive at a place that isn't a home but still refuses to lose you. At the end of the appointment, she studied my face the way nurses study charts. "Companies are tools," she said. "They don't fix people, but people with tools fix problems." Back in my room, I wrote Wardmere on the first page of a clean notebook and drew a box around it. Then I drew a smaller box inside the box and wrote, "Purpose, stability, housing, dignity." It sounds grand in ink. In bones, it just means nobody gets to decide whether I deserve heat. I made a list beneath that: open bank account, establish reserve fund, schedule insurance consult, read the fire code, find a property manager who doesn't confuse firmness with cruelty. The target appeared like a bird landing on a sill you didn't know you'd left open. A city bulletin matched the lobby flyer I'd seen near the mailboxes: Rivercrest Flats delinquent taxes, sale scheduled. A note from the city assessor said the building was structurally sound but deferred on maintenance, as if neglect were a layer of dust that could be wiped with the right cloth. I closed my eyes and saw the crooked hook where the red ribbon key had hung, and I tasted metal. "All right," I said to nobody. "Let's learn exactly how a roof becomes mine." I met Devin Liu the following week, a property manager whose posture said he had learned to listen to pipes telling the truth. We sat in a coffee shop that had a bulletin board full of babysitters and violin tutors and a single index card that read, "We shovel." Text Gabe. Devin's eyes kept track of 3 things at once: my face, the clock, and the workers refilling the pastry case. "Rivercrest," he said, tapping his phone. "Good bones, noisy vents, thin insulation, tenants are restless. Management's been, minimalist." "Minimalist?" I echoed. He smiled. "A generous word for people who treat repairs like rumors." He showed me photos on his phone: a hallway light that flickered like a bad promise, a laundry room sign that said "out of order" with a smiley face. "There's also noise." He didn't mean decibels. He meant Petra, the way she complained in paragraphs, the way she CC'd city officials and #justice, the way she turned a squeaky hinge into a referendum. "She files a lot of tickets," he said, choosing his nouns with care. "And she leaves a trail. Buildings don't fail overnight, people do." It startled me, how his aside lined up with the private sentence I'd been carrying like a stone in my pocket. I asked about the auction process and whether a new owner could reset practices without setting fire to the community. Devin answered like a man who knew maps by walking them. "Stabilize, communicate, document. Show you're fixing what the last folks ignored. Be boring in your paperwork and humane in the hallway. People notice boring. It means you'll still be here next month." I wrote it down verbatim. Boring can be a blessing. I kept my face still when he mentioned tenant unrest. It sounded like a cough you learn to ignore until it becomes pneumonia. "What if someone wanted to manage the building better?" I asked. Devin tilted his head. "Then they'd need to understand exactly how it breaks." Quietly. He slid me a generic maintenance report. "Also, one tenant complains about everything. She'll tell you the mailboxes gossip at night. Petra. Something." He checked his screen. "Novak." I took a careful breath and uncurled my hands under the table. In the evenings, I practiced anonymity like an opera singer. Practices breath, shoulders back, chin level, steps that said I belonged where my feet were. Miriam set up a mailing address that belonged to Wardmere but would still find me if I moved. She confirmed a registered agent who would answer doors so I didn't have to. I bought a blazer that fit like a decision and shoes that didn't apologize for floors. My husband's sweater stayed in the closet, tender and out of sight, the way a memory is when you need your spine to do the speaking. I printed the municipal code sections and slid them into plastic sleeves in a binder labeled, in my handwriting, habitability. When a clause used words that sounded ceremonial, I rewrote them in kitchen language. Tenant must have heat. Keep the soup warm. I highlighted the line about notice for inspections and taped a sticky note. Dignity means warning people before you open their doors. I bought a cheap laser printer and felt rich just hearing it hum like a small, obedient engine that would print my future on command. The soft clash arrived on a Tuesday when the city sky was the color of a nickel. I had stayed late at the library to rewatch the tax sale webinar. When the streetcar slid to a halt, I found a seat near the back and kept my binder balanced like a tray. At the next stop, Noah climbed aboard, shoulders rounded inside a jacket that had known too many pallets and not enough vacations. He stood facing the doors, then turned, scanning the car. His eyes landed on my coat, the thrift store brown I'd tried to dignify with a scarf. For a heartbeat, his mouth softened into something I recognized from skinned knee days. He looked like he might stand, cross the aisle, say Mom. Then the car jerked, and a flock of passengers shifted, and he caught sight of himself in the window, his life reflecting back at him. Husband. Employee. A man who had let a woman he loved be measured in minutes of hot water. He looked down and fussed with his transit card as if it were fragile. When he got off 2 stops later, he didn't look back. It hurt in a careful way, like a doctor pressing a bruise to see how deep it runs. I went home and found a text. Are you safe? A minimal kindness, typed with thumbs, trying to be both absolved and still. I opened a draft and wrote, I'm learning to be. Then I didn't send it. You cannot heal someone else's conscience with your reply, and anyway mine needed both hands. I closed the message and copied a statute into my notebook in steady script until my pulse agreed to return to normal. When Miriam called with an update, I answered on the first ring. Mail is routed, she said. Bank account established. Reserve fund is parked. We'll avoid heroics and embrace prudence. I liked how she paired words avoid divided by embrace as if making choices could be grammar. She asked if I wanted a generic email for the company. Yes, I said. Something tidy. She chuckled. Tidy is underrated. I added an index card to the binder, passwords, lockbox codes, a small map of responsibility with my name at the center, not as queen, but as custodian. Devon invited me to shadow an inspection on an unrelated property so I could see how peace is kept with clipboards. The inspector tapped a ceiling tile and nodded. This one listens, he said, meaning the building told the truth when asked. A tenant complained about a draft, and Devon opened a window, found the problem, promised weather stripping tomorrow, and did it that afternoon. Promises are dates, not speeches, he said, glancing at me. I wrote that down too. There are sentences you can hang doors on. At night, I cross-checked auction rules with bank balances and constellations of tiny fees. I practiced my proxy bid with a paper form, filling each line in block letters like a student who hopes neatness earns mercy. When I didn't understand a clause, I wrote a question mark and a friendly translation beside it, then emailed Miriam and waited for her answer instead of guessing. This became a rhythm. Learn, ask, write, confirm, sleep. I stopped measuring days in loneliness and began measuring them in pages. The micro-reveal landed on me like a slowly falling feather. In the city's online portal, I searched Rivercrest's service requests. There was the expected maintenance, lights, garbage, a leak no one believed until mold believed for them. But another category flashed like a tongue of flame, nuisance filings short, petty, time-stamped. Complaints about scuff marks on stair treads, about the tone of a super's greeting, about low morale paint. My stomach tightened at the attached email addresses, aliases that traced back, through a few sloppy patterns, to Petra. She had been building a dossier, a paper theater in which she always played the wronged. I printed 3 examples and slid them into the binder behind a tab I labeled, in neat capitals, patterns. I wasn't gathering them to punish her. I was gathering them because patterns predict storms, and storm maps save lives. If ownership became mine, her habit could boomerang, every tantrum a record, every exaggeration a reason for neutral process, not special treatment. Her own insistence on paper or it didn't happen would be the standard by which she'd have to live. The fairness of that steadied me. A week later, Devon forwarded a tenant-wide email thread with my new company's address quietly BCC'd at my request. Petra had written a paragraph about chronic disrespect from faceless management. Another tenant replied, "They fixed my heat." Another, Thanks for the new hall lights. Devon's one-line answer. Work orders logged. Timelines attached. I read the timestamps the way you read tide tables, predicting when the water would turn. The room where I'd once measured grief now measured readiness. I kept practicing my new walk, not swagger, not apology. In the mirror, I checked my shoulders, back, not stiff. Chin, level, not lifted. If I looked like I expected to be here, more doors would behave. At the bodega, the clerk started calling me Miss W by mistake, reading my mail labels. I didn't correct him. It wasn't a lie. It was an abbreviation. I thought of my mother, how she'd fold parchment around pastry without breaking the seam. You do not shout identity when it can arrive on quiet paper. On Sunday, I met Miriam at her office, because some decisions like the smell of weekday carpet. We reviewed the proxy bid language again. Be prepared to lose, she warned. Prepared to win, I countered. She allowed herself a pleased look. Both require the same posture, calm. We signed a few more documents. She placed a pen perpendicular to the folder, a habit, I suspected, of people who like order to be visible. Whatever happens, she said, remember documentation is your friend. Mercy is policy you write before the problem knocks. I wrote that on a sticky note and pressed it inside the binder's front cover. I walked home by the river where the ice pretended to be certainty and geese argued about it. I felt a new sturdiness under my coat, not anger, not hunger for triumph, something quieter, orientation. Like a compass remembering north after living in a drawer. On the streetcar, I watched neighborhoods scroll past, murals of hands holding each other up, laundromats bright as chapels, front steps that needed salt. I didn't see Noah that day, but I saw the seat where he had stood, and I practiced forgiving him in advance for not sitting. Back in my room, I opened the binder and said out loud what I intended, because rooms remember. I will run a building like a kitchen, I said. Prep early, label everything, keep knives sharp, and clean as you go. The radiator purred. My phone lit with a new message from an unknown number that turned out to be a bank verification code. I confirmed the alert and filed the email. Then I turned the page and wrote the sentence that would carry me into the auction. I will not be cruel. I will be clear. The city posted an update. Auction confirmed. Date, time, location. Rules about deposits and proof of funds. I set 2 alarms, one practical, one superstitious. I laid out my blazer and binder, the way you lay out bread and knife before you slice. I thought of Petra counting my showers, and of Noah not standing on a moving streetcar, and I made room in my chest for both hurt and steadiness. The hurt reminded me I am human. The steadiness reminded me I am capable. Tomorrow, I would attend in the way that matters most, prepared. Auction morning was the color of old receipts, the city already awake and counting itself. I dressed like a contract. Charcoal blazer, flat shoes, hair pinned so it would not flutter when numbers were spoken. Miriam met me in the municipal lobby where sales happened without adjectives. Win or lose, she said, we stay boring on paper and humane in practice. Our proxy bid sat folded in my folder like a quiet blade. Proof of funds, deposit, signatures, all in place. Inside, paddles rose and fell like disciplined fish. When Rivercrest Flats was called, my chest did not leap. It steadied and waited for the price to settle before closing. Numbers moved like weather fronts across a bare map. A man scratched his nose and withdrew. A woman lifted, lowered, lifted, surrendered. Our representative raised his paddle once, then sat with the calm of a clock. Silence considered us, and the auctioneer announced, Wardmere Holdings, as if reading the forecast. Payment verified. Terms acknowledged. Redemption period per notice. Miriam squeezed my fingers once, professional and warm. We signed exactly where signatures live, wired what wires require, and accepted a stamped copy that smelled faintly of toner and certainty. Outside, wind slid along the stone like a blessing. We had bought the chessboard. Now we would learn to move with care. I did not rush to the building. I brewed tea in my rented room and watched crates of oranges glow in the alley. Then I called Devon. We begin with pawns, he said. Light bulbs, locks, mice. Boring first. We drafted a neutral message from WH. Properties, promising tenant relations would be reviewed, repairs prioritized, and information centralized through a portal. Office hours, phone number, service address, all printed without drama. The email sounded like a level floor. Nothing to trip on, nothing to hide. We pressed send. Packages began to move in the right direction, even if no one knew a widow had pulled the string behind the curtain. Petra received the message and crowned herself. She posted a story over a staged countertop. When you shame management, they listen. She told friends she had bullied faceless suits into compassion and printed the email like a trophy. At dinner, she declared victory, as if a door had bowed to her voice. Noah nodded from habit, not conviction. The apartment filled with a sweet smell that faded as soon as anyone opened a window. She believed attention was leverage. I believed systems were levers. Her victory would be useful. I needed her loudness to build our record of calm. Noise becomes evidence when patience writes the minutes and dates carefully. 3 days later, an anomaly took its place quietly. The new lobby placard read W.H. Properties in clean letters, and beside the name rested a tiny anchor, a private nod to the line that made me possible. I stood across the street in a wool hat and watched people pause. Petra squinted at the icon like a detective who wanted a villain. "Another shell," she said. Noah shrugged. "If they fix the heat, they can call themselves jellyfish." The anchor was not a boast. It was ballast. Ships need weight to ride storms with dignity. So do buildings. So do mothers. Symbols earn meaning when maintenance arrives on time. Devon began rolling upgrades that made visible promises. Hallway LEDs replaced the nervous flicker. A child sent a picture of homework under steady light. Door sweeps kept winter teeth from biting ankles. Parcel lockers turned packages from prey into parcels again. Pest control arrived on schedule, with notices written like recipes, ingredients, timing, safety. We answered messages within 48 hours, even when the answer was, "We are still checking." I learned that predictability is a form of grace. The super taped a note, "We are after squeaks now." People smiled at the elevator, and the elevator tried not to hesitate. Boring days returned, tender as bread rising without drama daily. 2 weeks later, the rent reset letters went out. We had studied comparables, audited expenses, and written clauses like careful stitches. The letters explained inflation, maintenance, and the tax weight Rivercrest had carried too long. They offered meeting times, translation help, and payment plans that did not shame. They did not apologize for gravity. I printed my copy and traced the paragraphs with a pen to feel their edges. Policy is mercy, written before the storm. For Noah and Petra, the number tripled, aligned with market and the unit size. It was the same truth she delivered to strangers with a bright smile. Now the mirror returned her market language. I called Miriam before release because I needed to say it aloud. "This will hurt him," I said, meaning my son, meaning the boy who once measured happiness by birthday candles. She did not flinch. "The ledger must carry what living together costs," she answered. The sentence steadied me. "I'm not punishing them," I told her. "I'm correcting the math of how they measured me." Breath swam back into my ribs. "Proceed," she said. "Blessings are soft, instructions are stronger." I signed the stack, dated each letter, and imagined a future where fairness would be boring again. Boring is the sound of roofs working and stoves behaving on cold nights. When the envelopes landed, the building inhaled. Some tenants groaned, then nodded, because reliability costs and neglect costs more. They booked appointments. We listened. We made schedules like bridges. A grandmother brought a tin of cookies to the office after her heat stopped sighing. A nurse thanked us for locker codes that worked at midnight. We set up plans that matched paydays. We sent clear receipts. We avoided lectures. Respect does not require speeches. It requires clocks that keep time. I learned names, not gossip. People told us where the wall paint flaked like old snow, and we answered with drop cloths and care. Small dignity changes everything over winters. Petra did not inhale. She performed. Her email arrived with a subject made of sirens. "This is extortion." She CC'd a counselor, 2 friends, and an influencer who writes about mold as metaphor. She attached a photo of a stair scuff, like evidence from a crime scene. Devon answered with 3 attachments: market comparables, maintenance logs, and the city's arrears summary. At the desk, he shrugged. "It's a spreadsheet," he said, and went back to ordering door closers. She sent another message, then another, then a third that had more exclamation points than nouns. Anger can be counted, so can timestamps. Records remember longer than attention ever chooses to. We walked the halls like neighbors with clipboards. Devin knocked before entering even when notice was posted, because respect can be routine. We logged work orders and wrote "done" beside each finished promise. The trash area stopped pretending to be a rumor and became a plan. The anchor on the placard gathered a little meaning from repetition. "No exceptions, no cruelty," I told him again. He smiled. "Rules that behave," he said, "are the kind people follow." A boy in socks slid down the polished corridor and laughed like a bell. The elevator paused less often. The stairs told the truth and no one fell. Predictable buildings teach gentle confidence. In the evenings, I fed the folders. Every notice, every reply, every invoice wore its date like a small hat. We scanned, named, and filed until the digital cabinet looked calm. I slept better knowing a future judge could meet our decisions and nod. Paper can be a kindness when memory is tired. I wrote a short policy about response times and taped it above the desk. I wrote another about respectful language and taped that beside it. The super brought donuts and called us the boring crew. Boring is what elevators crave. Boring is what families need when rent changes. Calm paper shields everyone from tomorrow's sudden weather. The portal aggregated messages into patient graphs. Devin clicked patterns, and lines rose and fell like tides. Spikes followed every refusal, valleys matched completed repairs, and a tall new cliff appeared exactly 12 hours after the letters mailed. We opened individual tickets. Petra accused a maintenance worker of hostile sweeping. The door camera showed him whistling and moving dust like dancing air. She reported mailbox trauma. The footage showed staged envelopes peeking out like actors bowing. I was not gathering this to ruin her. I gathered it because fairness needs receipts. Her own tantrums were writing the history that would later contradict her story. Records speak when tempers finally cool. As weeks turned, repetition became trust. We painted stairwells, a patient green, tuned boiler settings, and posted schedules that matched real visits. Tenants began sending notes that were not complaints but sightings: a draft gone, a latch smoother, a door that no longer bit. The placard's anchor kept catching morning light, small and steady. I watched from across the street sometimes, hat low, just to measure posture and pace. The building no longer flinched. Devin kept summarizing with simple sentences that fit on one line. We were not heroic. We were consistent. Consistency, I learned, is the quietest kind of power. It moves walls without shouting, door by door. At night, I checked lists, thanked the printer, and stood at the window with the city's hum in my throat. The trap was not a snare. It was a table with rules. Hold still, tell the truth, carry your share. Petra believed she had forced ownership to Neil. She had only confirmed that attention cannot replace arithmetic. The anchor on the placard blinked once in my mind like a patient eye. I was not interested in triumph. I was interested in standards that would outlast anger. Tomorrow we would keep installing lights. Tomorrow we would keep answering. Tomorrow would be boring, on purpose, like safety. Boring keeps families housed, winters. Title registered by noon on a Thursday, and the registrar's stamp looked like a small official heartbeat. The wire confirmations arrived next, tidy as train schedules. Reserve funded, taxes current, insurance bound. The property account breathed on its own, no longer borrowing air from my savings. Devin submitted vendor W-9 seconds. Miriam finalized the management agreement. I approved the capital plan boiler tuning now, roof inspection before thaw, hallway paint this quarter, windows next year. The page turned from hope to schedule. The building stopped being a rumor and became a calendar. Power did not arrive as trumpets. It clicked, quiet as a latch. I signed routine payables, and my signature felt like a steady hand on a patient's shoulder. In the mirror, I said, I own the roof over the mouth that called me extra, and the sentence fit, not triumph orientation. Across town, Petra spread printouts on the kitchen table like tarot. business registry, corporate search, land titles. Each road ended at a privacy trust that gave her nothing but polite walls. She called a clerk and heard, "Ownership is recorded as filed," 3 times, as if repeating it might bake the answer faster. She printed the lobby placard, circled the tiny anchor in red, and pinned it to a corkboard where her grudges live. She told friends she was close, that jellyfish had spines, that someone would slip. Paranoia is hunger without bread. It chews the mouth that feeds it. I kept reading invoices, ordinary as rain. Devin texted boiler readings and photos of clean filters. Miriam sent a 2-line note, title perfected. I copied the month's priorities onto a legal pad and breathed through the simple holiness of sequence. Lights, doors, heat, then paint. In the evening, I stood by the window above the bodega and said to the glass, "Revenge shouts, justice signs the ledger." The words did not echo. They settled into the room like furniture that finally belongs. Outside, snow lifted and fell in slow revisions, and the sign in the lobby gleamed with its patient anchor, small as a vow. I sent one email, approve the hallway paint, and closed the laptop without ceremony. Power did not make me louder. It made the checklists quiet. I turned off the light, and the radiator answered with a single calm knock, the sound of a latch deciding, yes. The building and I exhaled together, calendar set, ledger open, for work. Petra did not march. She scattered. One morning, the building's tenant forum glittered with half-truths about a predatory landlord, the kind of phrase meant to recruit outrage before facts arrive. That afternoon, anonymous emails landed in our management inbox asking for bank routing confirmation and portal passwords, dressed in near-perfect logos that curled at the edges when Devin hovered. By evening, a call reached the title office from a voice introducing herself as counsel for a concerned tenant coalition. The clerk's notes, forwarded to us later, called the performance energetic, unspecific. Chaos moves like weather when a person mistakes thunder for leverage. I watched the pattern and straightened my papers. Devin replied to the forum with dryness that could water crops. Links to the work order log, photographs of new door sweeps, the boiler's clean filter arranged like a proud lung. He flagged the phishing messages and tightened permissions. 2-factor went from useful to required, and the after-hours line got a recorded preface about emergencies, meaning water, heat, or safety. "They want a face," he said, "and we keep giving them process. Process isn't evasive. It is a hallway with lights that come on." At lunch, I underlined 3 statutes again and wrote dates in the margins until the shape of order pushed back at noise. Loss arrived quieter at my son's door. Noah listed the old sedan and sold it for less than the sense of freedom it once carried. The next week, he texted me a photo of the bus timetable without comment, a small surrender dressed as information, groceries thinned into staples, rice, eggs, discount bread. The apartment's light dimmed early because Petra throttled the utilities like reins, insisting the thermostat stay at a number that kept breath visible. In the inspection report, a photo caught the bathroom's damp corner, mildew creeping up the caulk like shy ivy. Life doesn't collapse, it contracts, drawing its edges inward so the middle can pretend it is still whole. I read the report, signed the work order, and wrote, dehumidifier, fan timer, sealant, follow-up. Online, Petra cultivated fog. She captioned a filtered window, wrote about corruption in mid-rise housing, and tagged the counselor who once liked her open-house cupcakes. She paced the kitchen on speakerphone with the title office, trying a brighter voice, then a lower one. "This is Novak, legal liaison," she announced, until the clerk asked for a bar number and the performance stumbled. She emailed our property account from 3 addresses that looked like neighbors if you didn't squint, each asking for owner contacts. Devin routed them to spam and added a rule: if urgency arrives without details, it waits outside. I went to the supermarket when canned tomatoes were on sale, a habit thrift taught my hands long before spreadsheets taught my eyes. At checkout, the cashier squinted, then brightened the way a person does when memory clicks into place. "Hospital," she said, tapping her chest. "You ran the cafeteria line, lentil soup Tuesdays." I laughed, surprised at how easily the sound still worked. She scanned tea, paused, and slid the box back without beeping it. "You fed everyone. Someone should feed you." The register chirped anyway, and she shook her head like a secret. Grace arrived dressed as a discount and stood there until I said thank you in a voice that didn't wobble. On the way out, I tucked the receipt into my notebook, next to statutes and schedules, proof that kindness belongs on ledgers too. Noah called late, the hour people use when honesty can hide behind yawns. His voicemail stuttered, then settled. "Hey, Mom, just checking. We're handling it. Are you sleeping okay?" I held the phone and watched the small triangle that would play his voice again, the universal symbol for reruns. I didn't press it. I opened my journal instead and wrote, "Silence is a kind of stitch. It pulls edges together without announcing itself." The next line came uninvited. "I am not a surgeon for another person's regret." I placed the journal under the recipe book the way you place a saucer under a cup to keep rings from marking the table. At the management desk, the mic that records service conversations clearly labeled caught Petra arriving with a smile that showed careful teeth. She leaned on the counter, tapping nails in a rhythm meant to unsettle. "Tell your boss I eat landlords for breakfast," she announced, as if bravado were proof of nutrition. Devin didn't rise to meet the theater. He clicked open the portal, time-stamped her previous tickets, and asked which maintenance issue she'd like addressed first. She named 6, none of them emergencies, all of them mood. When she left, he forwarded the audio to me with a note, "File under contact." I listened once, then labeled the clip with the date, her unit number, and the neutral phrase, "in-person communication." Evidence shouldn't gloat, it should breathe evenly on a shelf until asked to speak. I called Miriam from a bench that faced salt-stained snowbanks and told her I felt like a bookkeeper at the end of a long market day. "I believe in receipts," I said. She exhaled a small approval. I described the phishing waves, the spoofed emails that pretended to be vendors changing bank details, the way Devin had sent test transfers of $0 and caught the lie before money learned to disappear. "Good," she said. "Fraud hates checklists." On my lap, the folder of confirmations warmed like fresh bread. I wrote a small inventory on an index card: rants, calls, portal posts, desk audio. Order is not control for control's sake. It is a way to make harm earn its claims. Noah started taking extra shifts and came home with shoulders that looked borrowed from heavier men. Petra counted and recounted receipts at the table, then accused the fridge of stealing when groceries vanished on schedule. The thermostat became a battleground. He nudged. She scolded. The air stayed thin. On Saturday, he sold his weight set to a teenager who promised to become a linebacker. "Cash," Noah said, and the boy nodded solemnly, handing over crumpled bills that smelled like laundry. Later, the inspection follow-up showed the bathroom's corner scrubbed clean and the fan timer installed, but the photo caught something else: a towel bar drooping under the weight of damp days. Some things sag before they snap. That is how rooms whisper for help. Her rants multiplied. She filmed herself near the lobby, the anchor icon over her shoulder like a villain she'd caught in the wild, and posted about transparency while refusing to read the attached policy PDFs. A local influencer reshared the clip with captions that loved heat more than light. A neighbor DM'd the office to apologize for being tagged without consent. We thanked her and sent the maintenance schedule anyway. Petra began taping printed lists to her door. Grievances formatted like menus, drafts, stares, moral distress, each laminated in plastic sleeves. Devin photographed them once, for the log, then ignored them. Not everything loud is evidence. Some things are weather that passes if you keep the windows shut and the paperwork open. Late one afternoon, Devin sent a link with no commentary, the subject line holding only a date and unit number. The file opened to audio from the service desk, ambient lobby, footsteps, the soft thud of mail. Then Petra's voice arrived, bright and edged. She threatened to expose shady ownership, promised to stage a press moment, and insinuated the super liked to lurk. The microphone was unromantic. It captured impatience breathing through her nose and the exact minute she slammed a palm on the counter. Devin had anonymized the clip for training, used no last names, no unit identifiers in the audio, yet the pattern sang clearly. Our documentation stack grew another layer, ordinary and strong. Chaos had a timestamp now, and timestamps have a way of turning storms into timelines. I answered 2 tenant emails about radiator balance and drafted a memo clarifying quiet hours with examples that sounded like neighbors, not police. I scheduled the next pest visit and authorized a common area rug to swallow winter salt. Routine is a metronome, heart's calm when it ticks. In my notebook I wrote tomorrow's verbs: review, reply, renew, and closed it without underlining. When the phone lit again with an unknown number, I let it pass into voicemail. Boundaries are doors you keep oiled, not walls you build high. I brewed tea, filed the day, and stood by the window above the bodega. Snow powdered the crates like sugar. Hold, I told myself, not as command, but as promise. Paper remembers. I will. The building we're teaching will, too. I watched the courtyard from a bus stop across the street, the way nurses watch monitors, eyes on the pulse, ready to record. Noah stood alone near the bike rack, shoulders rounded, cigarette ember winking like a little lighthouse and then failing. He bowed his head. Winter breathed through everything. From my window later, rain started without asking. I wrote in my battered notebook labeled Bungalow Finder, undue rent? The words looked weak as a wet match. I drew a line through them, firm and slow, then closed the cover. Mercy should not be confused with erasing consequences for anyone. Still, grief tugged like a child at a sleeve. I pictured Noah younger, holding sparklers, mispronouncing August as August, delighting in heat. Now he cupped smoke with shaking fingers and studied the ground. I whispered, not for him but for me. Hold. Choose clean lines. Choose repairable choices this time. That evening the radiator kept decent time, and my resolve did too. I boiled water, counted breaths, then opened my ledger to the page labeled Decisions. Underneath yesterday's objectives I wrote tonight, wait, watch, do not move from principle because weather changes. My hands stilled without trembling in that room. Knock. The sound carried through hallway walls like a remembered name. I opened the door and found Noah soaked, water threading from his hair to his collar, trembling not from cold alone. He didn't ask to come in. He asked, very quietly, "Can I sit?" I stepped back, nodding once. He perched on the edge of the chair like penance. I handed him a towel, then tea, then quiet. Steam rose between us like a white flag. His fingers shook against the mug. "I thought I could handle everything," he said. "Turns out I can't even handle myself right now." I waited because rushing truth makes it trip. Rain kept ticking the window. He stared at the floorboards like a map he couldn't read. "She checks my phone. She times my breaks. She says anyone who disagrees is sabotage," he murmured. I kept agreeing until I wasn't there at all. "I made you small to feel tall next to her," he said finally, and the sentence landed like a plate set down carefully after shaking hands. I kept thinking things would smooth out after the next raise, after the next compliment. He blinked. Every after kept moving. I swallowed once. "You stood with her," I said. The room tightened just enough to make honesty necessary. He nodded, eyes red from something older than rain. We listened to the kettle stutter. "I owe," he whispered. "Payday loan. I thought it would be a bridge. I never told her." Silence breathed there. He didn't ask for money. He asked for space, for a surface where truth could stand without wobbling. "Am I a good man who did a bad thing, or a bad thing that keeps doing me?" he asked, voice shredded. "I do not know," I said, "but I know gravity." I poured more tea to give us something safe to watch. Steam, brave and pointless, climbed anyway. I thought fairness meant giving back the old rate. I confessed to the mug, then shook my head. "That would be paying for silence." He pushed breath through his teeth and nodded once. My notebook lay on the table, the page where I had written undue rent now scratched through like a healed incision. The ink scar reminded me why boundaries are stitched, not painted. "Forgiveness is not a coupon," I whispered to the window, and the rain answered with kind indifference tonight. Noah rolled the towel between his hands like rope. "She thinks I am weak," he said. "I am, sometimes." He looked up. "But I did this. Not her." The admission steadied the room. Outside, a siren wailed, then faded. We sat inside a quiet that wasn't empty, only listening together. I asked about the corner with mildew. about the thermostat battle, about meals. He answered plainly, grateful for questions that didn't prosecute character. "I sold the weight set," he said. "We needed cash." He laughed without joy. "I kept 10 pounds. Habit." I smiled. Habits sometimes keep people breathing still. "What do you need from me tonight?" I asked. He looked surprised, like a man expecting a lecture who received a chair. "A place to admit I am lost," he said. So we built one with tea and a towel and silence, 3 ordinary materials that somehow hold maps together. When he left, rain had thinned to something less personal. I wiped the chair, rinsed the cups, then stood alone amid the gentle wreckage of honesty. The urge to rescue pulsed, faithful and dangerous. I opened the window an inch. Fresh air arrived without bargaining. My heart practiced imitating weather. I considered writing Petra, considered offering a plan that looked like mercy and felt like enabling. Instead, I filled the kettle, then my lungs, and repeated what Devon once said: "Promises are dates, not speeches." We needed a date for culture to turn. We needed everyone invited, and witnesses present. The building had learned to expect quiet emails and warm light. But fear still paced certain hallways, listening for crackling drama. I decided to hold a public tenants meeting, not to humiliate anyone, but to be seen, to make policy visible, to stabilize the weather. I called Devon that night. "Community room next Thursday," he suggested immediately. Agenda posted 2 days before. Q&A structured. Sign in at the door. We bring coffee. We bring proof. I wrote it down, grateful for the certainty of logistics. "We also bring chairs," I added. Dignity sits better when knees stop shaking together. Miriam answered on the second ring, and I delivered the plan like test results, clear, necessary, bracing. "Keep the tone procedural," she said. "Facts first. People hear better when temperature stays moderate." I smiled. "I can do moderate." "You can do merciful," she corrected. "Mercy lives in policy that repeats." I pinned a notice above my desk, labeled Tenants, Meeting Prep, and made columns: Agenda, Charts, Timelines, Repairs, Legal, Courtesy. Under Courtesy, I wrote names of neighbors who might be nervous, with reminders to speak gently. Under Legal, I wrote codes that behave. Under Repairs, I wrote, Show receipts everywhere. Before sleeping, I walked to the window and spoke to my reflection the way mothers do when children cannot hear. "You may not rescue," I said gently. "You may invite." In the courtyard, a stray umbrella turned circles like a stubborn galaxy. Somewhere above, a radiator decided to purr tonight. The next morning, I visited the courtyard early. The bike rack leaned like a tired sentence. I rehearsed the meeting's opening lines under my breath. "Welcome. We are here to make the invisible process visible. We are here to take questions without heat. We are here to treat neighbors neighborly." I imagined Petra reading the notice on the board, feeling seen and threatened, which for her was the same sensation. I pictured Noah choosing a chair near the wall, back protected, hands quiet. The image hurt and helped. Pain keeps compassion warm. Clarity keeps it from boiling away into vapor. At lunch, I met Devon to finalize visuals. He brought renovation photos printed big enough to read hope from across a room. The hallway light no longer flickered. The parcel lockers reflected faces instead of theft. He tapped the agenda. "We show rules. We show receipts. We show progress, simply." We chose coffee over cookies because adults listen better with warmth than sugar. We booked a childcare volunteer from a neighbor group so parents could ask questions without toddlers eating cords. We tested microphones and printed a second sign-in sheet. Ordinary preparations felt like pillars. Anxiety needs architecture around it. That night, rain returned, gentler, like a teacher who expects improvement. I opened the recipe book to my mother's chocolate cake page and smiled at the stains shaped like past parties. "Guide my hands," I said, "not to bake, but to hold the room steady soon." The radiator agreed softly. Noah texted a single word: "Thanks." I read it twice, then set the phone down as if it could bruise. I answered tomorrow with a calendar emoji. Boundaries held. They did not deny love. They protected it from drowning in everyone else's weather. I slept with the lamp unplugged deliberately. Morning brought a message from Miriam. "Agenda looks sound. Remember, Procedure is kindness for strangers. I brewed coffee and wrote a closing sentence to practice later. Thank you for bringing your questions. Thank you for bringing your patience. A meeting is not magic. It is a room where futures rehearse. Before leaving for errands, I stood in the doorway and addressed the empty chair Noah had used. You are not debt, I told the air. You are a man choosing shape after collapse. The statement surprised me with its certainty. Belief sometimes arrives first, then builds reasons like scaffolding patiently. On the way back, I paused by the lobby notice board, already imagining the printed agenda tucked beside community classes and lost mittens. I touched the placard once, the tiny anchor cool under my finger. Revenge shouts, I said quietly. Justice signs the ledger. Then I went upstairs and prepared everything. Devon arrived early with a dolly stacked with foam boards, each one clean and legible, each one the opposite of rumor. He rolled them into the community room and leaned them in a row like choir members waiting for their cue. Lighting upgrades, the first header said, printed in calm blue, with before and after photos that made the flicker look like a memory. Door sweeps and seals, read the next, then boiler tuning and filter replacement, with a shot of the soot-black old filter beside the new one, white and obedient as a handkerchief. I set out carafes of coffee and a tray of apples and granola bars because respect wears snacks in public. On the sign-in table, I placed pens that work, clipboards that don't pinch fingers, and an agenda printed in a font you could read from 3 chairs away. We taped the agenda beside the corkboard flyer for dog walking and the announcement for a lost mitten. The header read, Tenant Meeting, Process, Repairs, Questions. Underneath, bullet points. We will review completed work, discuss upcoming schedule, standardize communication, answer questions. We will not debate personal histories, engage in shouting, allow interruptions. In the hallway, the super and I mounted security signage that replaced an old handwritten no trespassing with a clear neutral notice of cameras and contact numbers. The new sign carried a small anchor icon, tucked in the corner like a signature, not a boast, a legacy mark reminding me who paid for the first coat of paint on my name. Devon wheeled in the last board, parcel locker metrics, and we laughed because even usefulness can be charming. Documentation is a kind of mercy, he said, aligning the foam feet to the tape we'd placed on the floor. It remembers when we forget. I tucked programs into stacks, added a box of tissues, and flicked on the microphone. It hummed and steadied. The room smelled faintly of floor wax and possibility. 2 folding tables held handouts about maintenance requests, code citations translated into kitchen language, and a list of common scams to ignore. No vendor will ever ask you to change your bank details by text. A volunteer from the neighbor group arranged a corner with crayons and picture books, cheerful proof that questions and children can share space without anyone choosing between them. By 6, chairs began to squeak under winter coats. Mrs. Hernandez nodded at the coffee with a grateful sigh. A grad student I knew from late-night laundry asked if the stair paint was going to be non-slip. I pointed to the board labeled Safety Coefficient and watched relief loosen his jaw. A father signed in while balancing a toddler on one arm. The toddler reached for an apple and looked at me like we were conspiring in goodness. In the back row, Noah slipped in and sat near the wall, his posture protecting his ribs. He lifted a hand at chest height. I lifted mine back. Neither of us waved. We breathed. Petra arrived like a headline. Scarf knotted sharply. Phone already recording in a vertical rectangle that pretended to be truth. She scanned the boards, rolled her eyes at the anchor icon, and selected a chair on the aisle as if it were a front-row seat at a trial she had paid to attend. "Get ready," she whispered to a neighbor who didn't answer. Devon checked the desk mic, placed a small placard that said questions on the table beside the sign-up for speakers, then handed me the opening script. "Steady as hall light," he murmured. I folded the paper in half and felt the crease persuade my hands into stillness. The property manager, a gentle man shaped like a reliable coat rack, tapped the mic. "Good evening, everyone," he said. "Thanks for coming. I'd like to start by thanking Wardmere for committing to a steady capital plan here at Rivercrest. We know change is hard. We also know heat, light, and locks should be boring. Tonight, we'll show what's been done and what's next, and then we'll open the floor for questions. He introduced Devon, who walked the boards with a teacher's cadence: costs, timelines, photos. People leaned forward whenever a before shot dissolved into an after. Dignity is visible when fluorescent ballast stops buzzing, when doors sweep instead of bite. Then came the moment meetings are made to hold. The manager nodded to me. I stood, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear, and felt the room pull a small breath. "Good evening," I said. "I'm Elaine, the owner." The room went quiet in that particular way that includes air, sound, and the past. You could hear a receipt crinkle near the coffee. Petra dropped her phone an inch, and then recovered, framing me like a rare animal. Somewhere by the crayons, a page turned. I felt my heart take one deliberate step and then another. "This is a circus!" Petra exploded, leaping to her feet as if the word could tear fabric. A handful of eyes flashed toward her, then back to me. I kept my voice low enough to rest in. "No," I said gently. "It's a lease." The neighbor with the toddler snorted into his sleeve. Even laughter can be soft. I lifted the first handout, a one-page map of our communication process. "I did not come to argue," I said. "I came to show you the system that will keep your homes predictable." I caught Noah's eyes widen in narrow shock, then math. Devon clicked to a slide of time-stamped emails from spoofed accounts, addresses that looked like ours if you didn't squint, asking for routing changes and passwords. "This is what scams look like," he said. "We will never ask you to move rent to a different bank by text. If urgency arrives with poor details, it is not from us." He paused. "We trace the originating IPs to public Wi-Fi and to one unit. We anonymize the data, but the pattern matters." Murmurs moved through the chairs, not a wave, a tide. Petra crossed her arms. "Coincidence," she said, too loudly. A neighbor in a gray sweater stood up slowly. "I live 3 doors down," she said softly. "I've heard her brag she'll smoke out the owner." She said, "Everyone bends if you push loud enough." The room adjusted around the sentence, not with glee, but with relief that someone dared to name the draft they'd all felt under their doors. Devon didn't point, didn't label. He moved to the next board. Repairs completed with dates, signatures, a photo of Mrs. Hernandez's door latch behaving. "Documentation is a kind of mercy," he said, almost to himself. "It remembers when we forget." From the back row I heard, not loud, a boy's voice I first carried out of a bathtub. "Mom?" Noah asked, small as a start. He looked at me like a person begging a compass for north. I let the room see my hands rest on the table and not tremble. "I signed the papers with the same hand that cooked your birthday rice," I said. "One action doesn't cancel the other, but both require care." Someone exhaled, as if they'd been holding it for months. The toddler thumped an apple against a knee and giggled forgiveness no one had earned yet. Petra sputtered. "So this was about revenge," she barked, as if she could bully the syntax out of the air. I shook my head. "I did not raise the rent to break you. I raised the building to hold everyone." I gestured toward the photos of bright hallways. "This is what holding looks like: light, locks, heat, and timelines you can read." The neighbor in the gray sweater added, quiet as a blanket, "She fixed our heat." The words landed like a fold of warmth across the chairs. A hand went up a retiree on 7, the one who says hello to the mailboxes. "Can we ask about new lock cores?" he said. "Yes," I replied, lifting the key ring I had clipped inside my blazer pocket. The red ribbon key that once hung by the door, my initials EM, in careful black gleamed among the brass. Gasps are also quiet when they're intimate. "We will schedule core changes for common areas this spring," I said, letting the ribbon flash once before it fell back into my palm. "We'll post dates. No one will be surprised by doors anymore." My throat tightened for a private second, then I breathed and pointed to the board marked Security Timeline. A woman in scrubs asked about the boiler, whether the fix would survive next winter. Devon nodded. "We tuned for sustained load, not for the photo. We also set alerts. If the temperature drops below a threshold, we get a ping before your teeth do." Someone chuckled. Another hand asked about parcel theft. "We added cameras," I said, "but we mostly added lockers that don't lecture anyone about morality. They just work." A teenager asked if the walls would ever get art. "After we finish the roof inspection," I said. "Beauty rides on the back of safety." Heads nodded as if reminded of a homely truth they'd always known. Petra kept talking to her phone, narrating affront, panning to the boards like a prosecutor, narrating the anchor icon as if it were a mask instead of a memory. "How convenient," she sneered, "that the owner discovered philanthropy after tripling rent." Her neighbor shook his head and lifted a palm. "We're not saints," he said. "We just want the elevator to stop sulking." The room laughed, careful not to be cruel. Someone brought up the stairwell color. "The green is kind, Mrs. Hernandez said, and the air shifted another degree toward human. Questions continued. Ordinary as laundry, pet policy clarifications, a drain that needed love, a mailbox that stuck like stubborn gum. We answered without hurry. When interruptions tried to graduate into shouting, the manager pointed gently at the agenda's "No Interruptions" line, and the rules behaved. The volunteer passed crayons to a child who had used hers down to stubs. The coffee stayed hot. The granola bars dwindled with the kind of shame-free honesty that makes rooms better. I closed the Q&A by repeating the schedule for the next round of repairs and reminded everyone of the portal's "Track My Ticket" button. "We will miss things," I said. "You will remind us. We will answer. That's the contract." I looked at Noah and, without saying his name, said something to him. "If you need to speak with us privately, we will be here after." Petra rolled her eyes so hard the ceiling should have felt inspected. The manager thanked everyone again and gestured toward the boards so people could come closer and touch proof. The line at the lighting upgrades photo went long. You could see neighbors pointing to their own doorways like parishioners pointing to pews. Devin stood by the parcel locker metrics, explaining how usage spikes after storms. "Reliable storage is romance," he quipped. "It keeps promises." People laughed. I kept my posture the way I had practiced. Shoulders back, chin level, not elevated. Owners aren't tall, they're responsible. In the tide of milling, Petra confronted Devin at the desk, leaning forward, teeth bright. The mic captured it without drama. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "Tell your boss I eat landlords for breakfast." Devin glanced at the placard that said "Questions," and then back at her with the patience of a man who knows clipboards beat tantrums. "We serve coffee," he said. "Not breakfast." She spun on her heel, nearly colliding with the neighbor in gray, who didn't flinch because some people are too busy living to perform. Noah approached me slowly, as if the carpet might suddenly become river. "Mom?" he said again, smaller. Up close he looked tired in a way that comes from bargaining with yourself. "I don't know what to do." "Start with not drowning," I answered. "Then learn to swim with a coach." He nodded, not at me, but at an interior verdict. "I'll call someone," he whispered. "Debt counseling." "Good," I said. "Bring your calendar. They like calendars." He gave a sound that wanted to be a laugh and didn't make it. That was fine. We were not auditioning for joy. We were checking the roof. The outcome spread like steam, subtle, warm, real. Most faces relaxed into something not quite smiles. Exactly relief. A woman patted my sleeve and said, "Thank you for the paint." A teenager fist-bumped Devin as if competence were a sport. The father, with the toddler, pocketed 2 granola bars with a sheepish grin. I pretended not to see because hospitality counts best when it doesn't file a report. Petra glared from the door like a queen whose court had discovered better plumbing. She left without slamming anything, which felt like a small miracle rented by the hour. We stacked chairs in 2s, then 4s. The volunteer tucked crayons back into a tin shaped like a bear. Devin slid the foam boards into their sleeves, their corners protected like good knees. The super locked the storage closet and nodded at the new keypad, satisfied that it beeped in the key of promise. I wiped a coffee ring from the table and looked at my hands. They were the same ones that had lifted a boy from bathwater, wiped a forehead, folded a blanket. Now they folded the agenda, and the paper made a crisp little sound that I decided to take as permission to go home. In the hall, a retiree stopped me. "About those lock cores," he said, smiling. I lifted the key ring again, and the red ribbon caught the light, a quick flare of remembered dignity. "Scheduled?" I said. "We'll post dates." He nodded. "You run this like a good kitchen," he observed. "We try," I said. He shuffled away, humming a tune I knew from radio in the year my son was born. Outside, the air felt like a door that opened when you pressed gently instead of kicked. I walked past the placard in the lobby and touched the small anchor once with the back of my knuckle, like a private amen. Then I stepped into the winter night with a posture I recognized from another life, the posture of someone carrying home a ledger that balances. Behind me, the room emptied, the boards slept, the coffee cooled. Ahead of me, the building looked less like a story about cruelty and more like a place where people live. That was the point, and always had been. I didn't look back for applause. I carried the keys. The ribbon didn't snag. It just moved with me, quiet as proof. Petra's last email arrived at dawn, subject line like a clenched fist. "I will go to the press about your little secret." She attached nothing, just threat. I forwarded it to counsel and poured coffee as if I were steady. Our attorney replied within the hour with a cease and desist that did not raise its voice. Attached were exhibits that breathed instead of blazed. Her earlier threats, the spoof logs that mapped their routes like weather, and the desk audio where she bragged about hunting an invisible owner. The letter cited statutes, demanded retraction, and warned of costs. Then we waited. 2 days of quiet passed before the fog lifted. Her posts went still. Noah packed a duffel, moved into a room, and booked therapy without asking me. After the meeting cycle settled, I asked Miriam to begin the sale. We did not dress it in drama. Appraisal, listings to vetted buyers, walkthroughs where Devon spoke for the building as if it were a patient learning to breathe. I kept my voice small and my records large. The offer we accepted was fair and clean. On a bright Tuesday we signed, and the new owner shook my hand like a colleague. The wire hit the account before lunch. I logged out, walked to Harbor Lighthouse, and met the director in an office full of art made by children. We structured the gift as a wing named for my mother, Eleanor, quiet on paper and bright at the door. Harbor Lighthouse, Eleanor Wing, rooms for safety without shame. With the rest, I bought a modest bungalow in Scarborough on a street that remembers bicycles. The porch faced west, and the roses by the steps were stubborn in the best way, thick canes that refused to be lectured by wind. The agent talked about upgrades, and I nodded and chose quiet instead. I changed the locks, asked the handyman to mount a small wooden hook by the door, and stood in the kitchen with the recipe book open to stew, as if turning a page could season air. Boxes came and went. A neighbor waved with a rake. In the yard I knelt and found the soil willing to trust me. You do not need acres to practice belonging. You need a key, a sink that listens, and time. Noah helped me move on a Saturday that smelled like rain and cardboard. We lifted without commentary and set boxes down where future could find them later. I made soup, simple as rescue done right, and we ate at the counter with our sleeves pushed back. He slid a folded paper toward me, a receipt from community education. "Debt management," he said. "No bravado, only plan." I touched the corner. "Good," I answered. He stared at the spoon, then breathed. "Mom, is there room for me if I become someone new?" "There was always room for you," I said, "not for your excuses." He closed his eyes, then nodded, as if a verdict had arrived that could hold weight without crushing ribs. We washed bowls and did not hurry dry. Petra went quiet after counsel sent the exhibits. The board thread cooled. Her door lost its laminated lists. Perhaps she learned the cost of projection when paper answers back. Perhaps she simply found another stage. I did not look. I kept my ledger honest. When anger rose like old steam, I named it and let the kettle cool. Revenge shouts. Justice signs the ledger. I signed releases to transfer records to the new owner and thanked Devon for his patience that never made a speech. We walked the halls once more, noting paint that would need touching in spring. He carried the boards to his car and saluted the lobby placard. "It may stay," he said. "It has manners." I smiled. Symbols belong to whoever keeps their promises over time. The director at Harbor Light walked me through bright halls where lullabies happen at noon. We planned beds that do not complain, doors that whisper closed, a pantry that never asks questions before it offers a can. We chose a soft plaque by the entrance, not a headline. Eleanor Wing, it would read, in letters that hold hands. I wrote the check and felt nothing dramatic, only weight moving to where weight should go. Women and children need roofs that are not bargaining chips. We toured a quiet room with a small desk and a nightlight. I pressed my palm to the wall as if testing a patient for fever. "Strong," the director said. I nodded. I asked if the kitchen could have a big pot. She laughed. Of course. Closing day for the sale felt like a well-timed exhale. The buyer's team arrived with clipboards and respectful shoes. We walked the boiler room and the roof hatch, traded lists, and shook on the ordinary miracle of continuity. I handed over the binders, color-coded, and said an unremarkable thank you that meant the world. Devin gave me a small envelope containing a copy of the first work order we closed together. "Keep it," he said. "Proof breeds courage." The super hugged me with one arm and promised to oil the stair rail as if it were a violin. I stepped outside after the signatures and looked back at the lobby just once. The anchor shone a little without me. Good, I thought. Legacies should not need witnesses anymore. In the bungalow, I unpacked slow, careful not to rush belonging. I shelved plates and measured the drawer that would guard the good knife. The porch swing arrived in a flat box and I assembled it with a borrowed wrench while sparrows supervised from the fence. Inside, I mounted the small wooden hook at eye level and stood there a long time, imagining the red ribbon sleeping on it like a small flag at peace. The roses needed pruning. I wore gloves and learned their temper. In the evening, my neighbor left a jar of jam on the step with a note that said, "Welcome," in tidy print. I brewed tea, opened windows, and let the house introduce itself. It smelled like paint and plans. It sounded like possibility tonight. Dusk pressed the street into softer shapes. I carried the keys outside and sat on the new swing while the porch learned my weight. Cars went by like careful thoughts. Somewhere a radio played a song my mother liked. I stood, went inside, and took the ring from my pocket. The red ribbon trailed my fingers. I slid the key onto the hook by the door and felt a click that sounded like prayer. They tried to make me disposable. I learned to be durable. I said it once, not for effect, but to set the room. I tucked the recipe book on the shelf with the letter resting inside, beside the donation receipt. Then I added a note for Noah. Folded. "You do not need permission to be decent." I slept the first night with the window cracked and the porch creaking, a kind agreement. In the morning, I walked to the corner and bought bread I did not have to justify. Back home, I labeled a drawer for tools and another for tape, then laughed because order still delights me. Messages pinged on the phone, one from the buyer thanking us for clean files. One from Devin sending a photo of the new stair rail shining. One from Noah with a calendar appointment for counseling, and a thumbs up that looked shy. I wrote back with a check mark and a pot of soup emoji, because sometimes language needs pictures. Afternoon light pooled on the floor. I sat in it and let my bones believe the word enough. Thank you for watching until the end. If this story touched your heart even a little, that's our greatest joy. If you'd like, please share your thoughts in the comments. We'll keep bringing you stories that stay with you, so please consider subscribing to the channel. See you in the next video.